So you want to become the Prime Minister. Sounds simple enough on paper. Win an election, get handed the keys to the country, and suddenly you're the most powerful person in the room. That's the picture in your head, and it's not entirely wrong. But here's the part almost nobody thinks about before they get anywhere near that office. Becoming Prime Minister isn't really one big expensive moment. It's a slow, brutal accumulation of costs, favors, debts, and risks stacked on top of each other for years, sometimes decades, before you ever set foot in that building. And once you actually follow the money trail from a normal person to the head of government, the whole thing stops looking like a fairy tale and starts looking like one of the most expensive, high-risk career paths that exists anywhere in the world. Let's start right at the bottom, because nobody walks straight into the Prime Minister's office. You have to become a member of Parliament first, and that alone is not cheap. Running a serious local campaign, printing flyers, renting an office, paying a small team, buying local ads, can easily cost anywhere from $50,000 to several $100,000, depending on the size of the constituency and how competitive it is. Now, most of that money is not coming out of your own pocket, and this is the first thing people misunderstand. It's coming from your political party, from donors, from local business owners who like what you stand for, or sometimes just from people who want a favor returned later. Every single dollar that flows into your campaign from someone else is not a gift. It's a quiet investment, and investments expect a return. This is where the real cost of becoming Prime Minister actually begins. Not in money you spend, but in obligations you collect. Think of it like taking out dozens of small loans from dozens of different people, except instead of paying it back with interest, you pay it back with attention, with policy, with phone calls returned, with a seat at the table when it matters. A wealthy donor who helped fund your first campaign expects you to remember them when you're deciding who gets access 10 years later. A party leadership that promoted you early expects loyalty on tough votes, even when your own instincts disagree. None of this shows up on a balance sheet, but it is every bit as real as a bank loan, and it follows you all the way to the top. Now let's talk about time, because this is the cost that almost nobody accounts for properly. A normal career has a fairly predictable ladder. Political careers don't work that way. To even be considered for the top job, you typically need years, sometimes 15 or 20 years, of building a public profile, winning re-election after re-election, taking on cabinet positions, surviving scandals that would end an ordinary career, and slowly climbing the internal ranks of your own party. During all of that time, you are not earning what a similarly talented person could earn in business, law, or medicine. A skilled lawyer or a senior executive with the same talent and work ethic could be earning several times a typical politician's salary during those same years. So the person chasing the Prime Minister's office isn't just spending money, they're spending 2 decades of lost income in exchange for a job that isn't even guaranteed to happen. And here's the part that makes this whole path so unusual compared to almost any other job. In most careers, the harder you work and the more skilled you become, the more predictable your reward gets. Work hard as an engineer, and you can reasonably expect a promotion. Work hard building a political career, and there is no such guarantee. You could spend 20 years climbing, only to lose a single election by a few thousand votes, and the whole investment evaporates overnight. There's no severance package for a lost election. There's no consolation prize for coming second. This is one of the highest variance career paths a human being can choose. More like being a professional athlete chasing one championship than a stable profession with a career ladder. Let's talk numbers for a second, because they matter here. In most democracies, the actual salary of a prime minister is surprisingly modest compared to what people assume. It typically sits somewhere in the range of $150,000 to $400,000 a year, depending on the country. That sounds like a lot to an average person, and it is a comfortable income. But compare that to the fact that the same person could likely earn several times that amount running a large company, or working as a top lawyer, or sitting on corporate boards using the exact same skills and profile. So in pure salary terms, becoming prime minister is often a pay cut, not a pay raise, for the kind of person capable of winning the job in the first place. So if the salary itself isn't the real prize, what is? This is where you have to stop thinking about the prime minister's office as a paycheck and start thinking about it as an investment with a payout that arrives later, often much later. Former prime ministers, once they leave office, tend to see their earning potential explode. Speaking fees at major events can run anywhere from $50,000 to several $100,000 for a single appearance. Book deals for memoirs can be worth millions. Board positions at major companies, advisory roles, consulting arrangements, all of these become available specifically because someone once held the highest office in the land. The job itself often pays modestly. The credibility that comes after the job is where the real financial reward usually sits. Now let's talk about risk, because this career path carries a kind of risk that barely exists anywhere else. Every single decision made in office is made under intense public scrutiny, recorded, analyzed, and potentially used against you for the rest of your life. A single scandal, a single policy failure, a single bad headline at the wrong time can end not just your current term, but your entire political legacy. Unlike a business executive who can quietly move to a different company after a failed project, a prime minister's failures are permanently attached to their name in the historical record. There is no clean exit from a bad outcome. The reputational cost of failure in this job is enormous and largely irreversible. There's also a cost that rarely gets discussed honestly, and that's the toll on ordinary life. Security details follow you everywhere, meaning you lose the basic freedom of walking down a street unnoticed. Your family gets pulled into the public eye whether they want it or not, and every relationship, every friendship, every past decision becomes subject to public examination. Privacy, one of the most basic things a normal person takes for granted, becomes something a prime minister effectively gives up the moment they take the job, and often for years before that too, once they become a serious contender. Even something as simple as grabbing dinner with an old friend can turn into a headline if it's read the wrong way, which means a huge part of ordinary human connection quietly gets sacrificed long before the swearing-in ceremony ever happens. So why would anyone actually take this deal? Because for a certain kind of person, the payoff isn't measured in salary at all. It's measured in influence, in legacy, in the ability to shape decisions that affect millions of people at once, something almost no other job on the planet can offer. For the right person, that kind of influence is worth more than any paycheck a private company could offer. This is exactly why the people who tend to succeed at this path are rarely purely motivated by money. If money were the primary goal, there are dramatically easier and more reliable ways to get rich. The people who make it to the top of this ladder are usually chasing something that doesn't show up cleanly on a spreadsheet at all. Let's bring this back to something simple. Think of becoming prime minister like buying a lottery ticket that costs 20 years of your life and hundreds of thousands of dollars in campaign obligations. Except, unlike a real lottery, your odds actually improve the more skill, patience, and relationships you build along the way. Most people who buy into this journey never win the top prize. Some spend decades as a member of parliament and never rise higher. Some make it all the way to a cabinet position and stop there. Only a tiny handful out of the thousands who start this journey ever actually reach the very top. And here's the final piece that ties this whole picture together. Even after someone wins, the financial story isn't over, it just changes shape. In office, spending is heavily restricted, watched by auditors, opposition parties, and the media, all looking for any sign of misuse. But the moment someone leaves office, an entirely different financial world opens up. One built on reputation instead of a salary. The years in office essentially function like an extremely expensive, extremely risky credential, one that costs enormously to obtain, offers a modest salary while you hold it, and only pays off in a much bigger way, if it pays off at all, once you've stepped away from the desk. There's another layer to this that most people never even think to ask about, and it's the family side of the equation. A spouse or partner often has to quietly step back from their own career ambitions because two demanding public lives under one roof almost never works. Kids grow up literally inside the news cycle, sometimes becoming targets of criticism for things they never said or did themselves. None of this shows up in any economic report, but ask anyone who has actually lived close to power, and they'll tell you the family cost is often the heaviest bill of all, one that never gets repaid no matter how the political career eventually turns out. There's also the question of what happens if you belong to a system where no single party wins outright, which is common in many democracies around the world. In those situations, becoming prime minister isn't just about winning your own seat or even winning the most seats overall. It's about successfully negotiating a coalition, convincing smaller parties with their own competing interests to support you instead of a rival. That negotiation itself carries a hidden cost, because coalition partners rarely support you for free. They usually want cabinet positions, control over specific ministries, or commitments to policies that may not have been part of your original plan at all. So even the final step of actually becoming prime minister can involve handing out promises and positions before you've even sat down at the desk for the first time, further diluting the pure control that the title seems to promise on paper. Understand what you're actually signing up for. It was never really about the paycheck sitting behind that desk. It's about whether you're willing to spend 20 years, take on debts that can't be measured in dollars, and risk it all on an outcome that isn't guaranteed, just for the chance to hold that kind of influence, even for a single term.